Fighting games continue to be one of the most unique and intense competitive video game genres around today. Sure, you could duel it out in a first-person shooter or out-strategize your friends in a MOBA, but there's something unique about the friendship-endangering setting of a fighting game. If you grew up on video games in the 1990s, you likely know all about the impact that fighting games have had on gaming as a whole, especially the competitive gaming scene. It could be argued that fighting games hit their peak in the 90s. I mean, some of the most popular fighting games today are later entries in franchises that started in the 90s. In fact, a brand new Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat will have been released by the end of 2023. Considering how much fighting games today reflect the impact of earlier games, it's worth pondering whether fighting games have changed very much since. What is the state of fighting games today? Is being a fighting game fan today as exciting as it once was? Fighting games have a long history, longer than you might imagine. The first fighting game to feature hand-to-hand combat as its core gameplay element was Heavyweight Champ, and that came out in 1976. It was a primitive game that featured two funny-looking characters throwing punches at each other. You score points by knocking each other down. Not much footage exists of this game today, but from the few bits that do, it's clear to see how far games of the genre would advance just a few years later. For example, the 1984 fighting game Karate Champ. Karate Champ is much more similar to fighting games that we're used to today, with a side view of combatants and a tournament format. You could even take on your friends in a one-on-one match. In the same year, Nintendo released Punch-Out!, a boxing game featuring an over-the-shoulder perspective where you score points by landing punches on your opponent and scoring a knockout. Both games saw a ton of popularity and are still a lot of fun today. However, as I mentioned previously, fighting games saw the most dramatic shift less than a decade later. While the first Street Fighter was released in 1987, it was actually Street Fighter II that took fighting games to heights we may not have seen since. Street Fighter II built on and improved upon the groundwork that was laid out by the first game. It featured special moves that you could execute on command, and each punch or kick varied in strength depending on the button you pressed. However, nothing had quite the impact on the competitive gaming scene like the health meters featured in the game. I mean, think about it. Before Street Fighter, competing in a video game just meant scoring the most points. You could compete with someone who hasn't even touched the game you were playing in a week by just scoring more points than they did when they last played. But a health meter meant that you and the person you were competing with had to be present, and they had to be actively trying to beat you. If you wanted a second chance at being the better combatant, you had to challenge them and compete with them directly. After the release of Street Fighter II, fighting games blew up. A year later, in 1992, Mortal Kombat changed the scene again by upping the violence factor with their inclusion of gratuitous blood and gore, of course with fatalities, subsequently leading to the creation of the ESRB rating system. The year after that, Sega released the first fighting game to use fully 3D polygon graphics, Virtua Fighter, and that could go on and on. Fighting games just continued to advance exponentially. This led to dozens of sequels, spin-offs, and copycats. But it inspired many creative takes on the genre as well. One of the most notable being, of course, Super Smash Bros. While most fighting games, even today, resemble a similar format to games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Tekken, Super Smash Bros. Reimagined the entire genre. You're still beating up characters controlled by either a computer or other players, but now you can compete with more than two people on the screen at the same time, use platforms to move and attack from higher points in each level, and life meters have been completely done away with. Now, instead of fighting until the life of your opponent has completely run out, your goal is to knock your opponent off of the screen. You can do so by either raising their damage percentage as high as possible and landing a crucial blow, or simply knocking them off the side of the stage. This led to a whole new level of fighting game competitions and tournaments. Super Smash Bros. Was the first time me and my friends got to challenge each other to a fighting game in groups larger than 2 at a time. Rather than passing the controller so often between games, groups of 4 could go at it all at once. While the first Smash Bros. Game was extremely popular and influential, the second title in the series, Super Smash Bros. Melee, is still regarded today as one of the best competitive fighting games, and it's been featured in countless tournaments since its release. Today, with the exclusion of the booming arcade scene, the fighting game genre doesn't feel too different. We're still playing Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Super Smash Bros. We're still playing game tournaments, which we now call esports, and we still even use many of the same control schemes that were established decades ago. Street Fighter 6, for example, offers a new control scheme called Modern Controls, but still offers the option of playing with the classic controls, which most returning players still prefer, including myself. Mortal Kombat 1 hasn't even released yet, but I can tell you with confidence that Sub-Zero's freeze attack is going to be down, forward, and one of the two-punch buttons, because that's what it's been for 11 games now. But just because a lot of things have remained the same in the fighting game scene, it doesn't mean that things are worse or less exciting now. Well, there hasn't been a fighting game that has changed the entire landscape of the fighting game scene like Super Smash Bros. Or Mortal Kombat. The natural maturation of fighting games in general has made being a fighting game fan as exciting as it's ever been. I mean, seeing a fatality in Mortal Kombat 1 with extremely high-res graphics and detailed textures on a 4K screen is haunting, and just feels more intense than it ever could using 2D sprites that explode into piles of bones with multiple skulls and more limbs than you'd ever expect to come out of one human body. I mean, seriously, why are there multiple skulls here? The internet now allows fighting games today to continue to update and expand after launch. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, for example, which already featured the largest roster in the series, continued to release playable characters for years after its release, which kept the game feeling fresh constantly. Back in the 90s, something like that would have required like 4 different full-priced games. It's not just new fighting games that are benefiting from modern technology either. Fans who never quite got over the glory days of the 90s fighting scene are also accommodated. Compilations like Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection and Capcom Fighting Collection allow me to play games that not only slipped my radar, but simply weren't accessible to me when they were released. And now I get to jump between multiple games seamlessly without having to touch my console. Game nights between me and my friends now have us frequently jumping between various editions of Street Fighter 2, Alpha, and 3 within one night using one cartridge. Fans of longtime franchises and new players both have a lot of content to sink their teeth into in this generation of fighting games. What's perhaps the most exciting about today's fighting game landscape, though, are new games still to come. As mentioned previously, a brand new Mortal Kombat is releasing this year, which I've played and can attest to its awesomeness already. And we also have Tekken 8 on the horizon, which is being made in Unreal Engine 5. It promises high-res graphics and character models that have been built from the ground up, and it continues its long-running story. Team Ninja is also working on a reboot of its Dead or Alive series. Those who find jumping into a late entry in a long-running series daunting have much to look forward to as well. Games like Project L, which is supposed to be a 2D fighter with 2 vs 2 tag mechanics, kind of like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, features characters from League of Legends and could be a perfect starting point for new fans looking to enter the genre. While the fighting game scene doesn't feel as big or fresh as it once did, it's far from being less fun and less exciting. New fans have endless jumping off points across the genre, returning players are accommodated with brand new takes on classic titles and exciting new prospects. And if you never quite grew out of the golden age of fighting games, you have a plethora of options as well. I think that's what it all comes down to, options. And today, there are more top-tier quality and highly accessible options than ever before. For more information on all things technology and electronics, be sure to follow Engadget on all platforms. For more videos like this one, be sure to hit that subscribe button on Engadget's YouTube channel. Thanks.